What is up, guys? So today we are back with another deep dive. This time we're going back to a full typing instead of just a single Pokemon. So we're going to be looking into the Steel type today, of course, as you can tell from the title. And so Steel typing is a little bit different than the Dragon typing that we've already looked at, considering that the Dragon typing was pretty much clear-cut in terms of the use cases for those dragons. It's kind of a little different for the Steel types. We have multiple different use cases and multiple different personalities that kind of fill those use cases here. So, let's actually get into a little bit of our Steel typings. According to my spreadsheets and the numbers that I've ran, I've categorized our top bulk Pokemon, our top stat product Pokemon, and then I have some top viabilities here. And these are kind of like why over here in the color. So, let's actually just go through these really quickly. So, in terms of bulk, Bastiodon definitely has the most bulk in the cup. He's insanely bulky. His stats just really do reflect that. He's the one to beat when it comes to like most of the Steel types. He is the big boss. He is the main squeeze and kind of what really makes Lucario shine a lot here. Next in bulk, we do have Registeel, which is an interesting one. I still haven't looked too much into Registeel, but I do think that he's got some interesting quirks to him, because he's Steel. He's a pure Steel Pokemon, but he still does have a couple of fighting moves, if I'm not mistaken. So he doesn't have Power Up Punch, which is the whole reason that Lucario's a king here. Next we have Probopass. So I decided to include Probopass just for the possibility that if he comes out before the cup ends, at least in the video, I'll have him here. But of course, as of recording this video, he is not out. And he is kind of a weird Pokemon to really look at. But Probopass does come in third here. Steelix coming in fourth, which we know a lot about Steelix being back in the Boulder League. He was huge. And even in the Tempest Cup, he was kind of one of those sleeper picks that a lot of people didn't kind of use him for some reason. Like, I don't know if it was just he died down in popularity or if people just kind of overlooked him, but he definitely had a really strong position even in the Tempest Cup and still has a pretty strong position here in our Kingdom Cup as well. And last but not least, we do have Skarmory on our bulk list, and Forretress actually pulling up that very honorable mention slot if we just kind of forget about Probopass here. Skarmory here we have seen multiple times across the Tempest Cup, across the Boulder League. We've seen him quite a few times, and he's definitely a mainstay in a lot of the Great League Cups just because he has such a really, really strong typing. He's only got 2 weaknesses, so definitely worth looking at Skarmory in terms of a decent Steel option here. And then we do have Forretress pulling up the end here. Honorable mention just because Probopass is included. I've done a deep dive on Forretress. He's got a little bit of uniqueness going for him, but not too much, and that's kind of a letdown. But anyways, moving on to stat product here. So same exact list of Pokemon, they're just rearranged based on their stat product here. They literally, like, I would have included anybody that showed up differently, but it's just bulk and stat product ended up being the same Pokemon, just rearranged. So Registeel, Probopass, Steelix, Skarmory, and Bastiodon. So all the stat product really tells you is that Registeel has the highest stat product amongst all of these Pokemon, and Bastiodon, you can kind of see where his stats lie because he falls so much further down in stat product. Really means that his attack is not quite there. He has a ton of bulk, of course, so it just kind of reflects, you know, where Bastiodon ends up falling in the list there. And actually, Forretress does pull up our honorable mention slot in stat product there. I'm going to switch sides for this. This is weird. I've never done it left-handed. So viability here is actually our kind of like how good are they and why are they good. So our viability, I think these are listed in what I feel are the most viable Steel types in the cup. So Lucario, I definitely feel like is the most viable. He is the one Pokemon that I think everybody is going to have if they're serious in this cup. I think Bastiodon is the one that everybody wants, but because it's such a huge investment, it's going to be kind of hard to obtain, and only the real hardcore investors are going to go for the full-on Bastiodon. But I think if you have a Riolu and you want to play competitively, it's nice to have the Lucario, but it's not necessarily going to mean you're going to have a Bastiodon. I think Lucario is going to be more common than Bastiodon, is all I'm trying to say. So Lucario here, I think that Lucario is the most viable Steel type because of its fighting typing. So the fact that it has Counter and it has Power Punch, of course, makes it the most viable Steel type in this cup, which is interesting because it has nothing to do with Steel. He does have a couple of Steel moves, but nah, not worth. So Bastiodon here, I do think is the second most viable in our Steel types, and it's honestly because of his access to Rock type moves. His access to Smackdown and Stone Edge really make him a huge threat to things that are Ice and Flying type. It just really cements him as a good option for a lot of different scenarios, and the amount of bulk that he has really makes him hard to beat. It's insane. Next we have Steelix here, so I do feel like Steelix has a really, really good place in the meta because it has ground type moves. So it ends up covering a lot of the Steel types, and it has access to Dragon Tail, which really helps secure some of the Dragon matchups. So I think Steelix actually has a really, really good stronghold on the meta. Melmetal here coming in fourth. I think that Melmetal is an interesting one because it almost does a similar job to Bastiodon. The fact that it can target a lot of the flying types, being that it has electric type moves and it has Rock Slide, it can target a lot of the rock types, but it just doesn't do quite as good as Bastiodon, so it kind of ends up falling a little short there, but still a very good Pokemon. Last but not least, we do have Empoleon here pulling in fifth with water typing. So water typing is the interesting one because it really allows Empoleon to cover a lot of the fire types and ends up helping it a lot in the ground type matchups. So I think Empoleon is definitely a good Pokemon, and I don't know, like, if I were to do a water video, because considering that water isn't a typing in the cup, I'm not planning on doing that, but if I was, it would be a really hard pick to choose between Kingdra or Empoleon for which one's the more prominent one. The main thing that I kind of want to point out with Steel typing is that the fact that we have this viability here and there's all these subtypes, it's not the Steel type that's really viable in the cup. It's got some pretty interesting weaknesses to it. It's the fact that you have all these subtypes that make it so good in this cup. The rock subtyping here, the fighting subtyping, those just really cement a really good place in the meta. Having access to rock type moves, water moves, and even ground moves really put Steel in an interesting position here that you can really use it in a lot of different scenarios. Now, unfortunately, I don't feel like this video has too much new information to anyone who really has been looking into the meta and trying to figure it out themselves. If you've not been looking into the meta maybe as much as other people, then maybe this video has some interesting stuff to you. But I do kind of want to talk a little bit about each of these Pokemon on our viability list and kind of talk a little bit about where they kind of fit into a team. So the first two are really kind of obvious. I mean, they go into a team if you're dead serious about winning a tournament. Both Lucario and Bastiodon are really, really strong and really, really going to be a hard counter to a lot of things. So very interesting if you decide to go without one of them, and it would be really interesting if you decided to go without either of them. Now, in terms of our bottom three here, so Steelix has kind of an interesting place because it can almost do what Bastiodon does, except it has a little bit more of a hard time with taking out some of the flying types as quickly. It can deal with a lot of the dragons, and since most of the dragons have a flying type kind of deal going with them, mainly just Altaria. Altaria having just the flying type really makes it an easy target for Bastiodon itself, and it doesn't make it as easy of a target with Steelix. Although Steelix does carry Dragon Tail, it does help it a lot. I think that Steelix has definitely got a place in a team that needs more dragon coverage, and it's kind of almost like a budget Bastiodon, but it's not even that much of a budget Bastiodon, really. So it kind of does do a little bit of Bastiodon's job, but just not quite as well. And it has some issues with getting over the ice typing in some scenarios. Unless you were to use like heavy slam on it, which based on the deep dive that we did on Steelix, I don't know really which move set you decide to go with really dictates a lot, because if you don't end up going with heavy set, you do end up losing a lot of the viability against the ice types. But if you go with crunch, you have a lot more shield pressure and a lot more neutral damage to the meta. So Steelix is definitely a budget option to Bastiodon, but just not quite as good as Bastiodon in my opinion. Melmetal here. Melmetal has... It's really interesting because, you know, I used to talk a lot of crap about Melmetal back in the Boulder Cup, and it was because it was a one-trick pony, and its moveset really does secure that mindset for me. I really still do think it's a one-trick pony, but in this cup alone, it does end up having a little bit of viability towards the ice types with rock type moves, and then it kind of has some viability against the flying types. Like, it's still definitely like a Skarmory killer. Like, that's the biggest thing that I see it being used for, but some of the flying types are going to be susceptible to it. The problem is that it needs to have Rock Slide to really get over the Altaria, and other than that, there's not too many flying types out there, and short of like a couple of the water types being weak to electric typing, yeah, you've kind of got some limited use case there. I mean, it will do good up against Lapras, it'll do good up against Celio, it'll do good against Skarmory, and it'll do good against some of the ice types. He's not bad by any means, but he's just not like, boom, like amazing. He's just not like jumped out there like Bastiodon or Lucario is. Last but not least, Empoleon. So I really like Empoleon. I have to say, I really, really like him. He's got such a cool typing. Water and Steel is very interesting. I just don't know. Like, I haven't done a deep dive on Empoleon yet. He's coming up extremely soon because he keeps getting voted for. But he's just like, he has a lot of coverage towards the fire types, which I feel like both Lucario and Melmetal can be susceptible to the fire typing. So, I mean, he covers the fire in terms of what other steel types won't in some scenarios, but he just doesn't have a lot of like firepower. Like, he doesn't hit hard enough in a lot of scenarios. He does have access to some interesting moves, but he's not really like amazing to me. He doesn't really scream, you've got to use Empoleon. Like, it just doesn't scream that to me. So in terms of his role, he's definitely good at taking out a ton of the fire types, and even help taking out some of the ground types. Like, if you go up against Steelix, you know, Empoleon does do really well up against Steelix, and it'd be interesting. I don't know, I haven't looked. Would Empoleon straight up beat Flygon? It feels like it would, because it would resist a lot of the dragon damage. I don't know if it necessarily resists the ground damage though. Either way, I definitely feel like in terms of viability, these are definitely your top 5 steel type Pokemon. Not a big surprise that, you know, 2 of those slots are Lucario and Bastiodon, considering that was our, 2 of our 3 kings here. But I definitely do think that these 3, Steelix, Melmetal, and Empoleon, do deserve some attention in terms of your team composition, where you're at with your team. Are you already running these 2? Because if you're already running these 2, then these 3 may not be necessary. So, kind of just feels like maybe you can get away with just the top 2. It kind of feels like maybe you can get away with using some combination of these 2 instead of one of these. Steel itself is not the reason that these Pokemon are up here. The reason these Pokemon are up here are because of their sub-type moves that they have access to. So that is actually all that I have for the Steel typing, guys. Thank you so much for watching. Hopefully there was some kind of interesting parts to this video. I feel like it was pretty cut and dry. It wasn't super informative. Steel typing is really just... It's really just Lucario and Bastiodon. Like, that's the big 2. And unfortunately, the best runners-up kind of have been talked about to death, short of Empoleon, but I don't feel like this is a video that we should focus on Empoleon. It's more of focusing on the entire typing. So definitely hope that you got something out of this video that maybe can help out your team composition later. I'd be really interested to know what you guys think of the steel typing. Please let me know down in the comments below, and I'd love to discuss it with you. So, thank you so much for watching. If you like to like videos, make sure you do that. If you don't, you can be that guy. Otherwise, let me know what you have to say down in those comments below. And until our next video, I will catch you then.